doing it. So thank you very much. So please take a seat, everybody. My first question to you this morning, and please, no one put their hand up. There's going to be some people who want to put their hand up, but don't. Please keep it to yourself. I want to ask, first of all, who considers themselves a resilient Christian? Now, a resilient Christian is somebody who, that when hard times come, you just draw close to Christ and really focus on Him to get you through the tough times. You have a daily discipline of reading His Word. You speak to Him consistently throughout the day. Everyone around you knows that you are a Christian and knows the boundaries that you have set into the way that you behave and the things that they say to you. Who here thinks they're a resilient Christian? Don't put your hands up. Because I'm now going to ask who considers themselves, and no one nod towards somebody else to dob them in, but who considers themselves to be a convenient Christian? That they go to church when they feel like it. Most of the time it's to go to church to see your friends or to be seen at church. You don't really read the Bible by yourselves. If you go to a group to be with your friends or to pretend that you're a Christian, you read the Bible and you pray earnestly to let everybody know what a wonderful person you are. I saw a couple of smiles that I'm a little bit suspicious of. But thankfully to the lights, they were just lovely sets of teeth. I'll admit it, I will be the only one who will put their hand up. I was a convenient Christian right the way through. And when I tell you my story, you'll think there's something wrong with me, and you're probably right. And I'll tell you when it really hit the moment for me, which was in late November in 2015. I found myself kneeling down beside my bed, crying out to God to do something. I had lived a life, which I'll explain to you soon, where I've been up and down. There's been a lot of things that have happened in my life that could have drawn me closer to Christ, and they did until the problem went away, and then I just sort of started going back towards, well, my convenient Christian life. Hate to admit it, especially considering this is being filmed. But I was on my knees beside my bed because I'd been bleeding for 6 months. I had a routine colonoscopy in May that year, which was routine, no problems. I went to the doctor, he said, "Yep, we've looked at everything, everything's fine. Go your merry way. Keep doing what you're doing." My wife and I decided to go on holidays, but because of my business, Alison, my wife, decided to go before me, and she went up to the coast. It was just waiting for me, and I just had to do my business for the week. And the day after Alison left, I was sitting down watching television late at night. Can't remember what I was watching. You would think that would be a moment of mine, but I can't remember what I was watching. But I do remember all of a sudden, I just felt really warm. And it was November, and you're used to being warm in November, but it just felt very uncomfortable, and I looked down, and all I could see was blood. And I thought, well, this isn't good. So I just casually walked over to where my phone was and picked it up and called the ambulance. I decided to go onto the front balcony so that I could see when they came. But after a few minutes, and as you know, ambulances don't necessarily come immediately. They're not parked around the corner. I decided to then go and sit in the shower because I was still just bleeding. And I couldn't stop it, and I was wondering what was going on. But I've had a few moments in my life, and so excessive bleeding without any reason, this isn't the first time. The ambulance came. They picked me up. They took me into the ambulance, took me to the hospital, and they said, "Okay, we know what it is. We'll find it out. We'll plug you up." And they plugged me up and I spent the night in hospital. And I called my wife from hospital just to let her know what had happened. Because it was, I'm her husband. Got to do the right thing. I knew that Alison would be stressed about this because she knows my history. I said, it'll be fine. I'm home tomorrow. They've plugged me up. I'm staying in hospital overnight, but I'll be home tomorrow. I'll let you know. She said, I'm coming down. I said, no, you deserve this holiday. I'll be with you soon. So I went home. 2 nights later, I'm lying in bed. And I felt that warmth. And I thought, I'm paranoid. There's nothing wrong with me. They've plugged me up. It's fine. I turned on the light, pulled back the sheet. Looked like a Stephen King movie, my bed. And I thought, here we go again. But then when I lifted my head, whoa, I'd lost a lot of blood. So I contacted the ambulance, crawled back into the shower. When the ambulance did get there, one of the guys from the ambulance wouldn't go in because it looked too horrific. But they got me to the hospital and they gave me emergency surgery, with the doctor telling me afterwards that I nearly didn't leave that table because he couldn't stop the bleeding. What's wrong with you, boy, is what he said. We couldn't stop the bleeding. And I said, I've got a bit of a blood clotting problem. I spent 2 weeks in hospital, had 4 blood transfusions, and it was a very difficult and uncomfortable time. My wife, of course, did come home from holidays. She did sit by my bed. She did see me having to be, in her mind, attacked by those trying to keep me back alive, trying to keep me alive, and pounding on my chest, and me looking at her like, can you believe that after everything that I've been through, this is what it is that's going to kill me? This? But obviously it didn't. And I recovered and I left hospital and I got better. But it was now 6 months later and the bleeding was still occurring and I was angry. I wish I was on my knees praying to God in humility and asking him, what can we do? But I wasn't. I was angry because here I am again asking him to help me out when I'm just about to die or feel like I'm about to die or want to die. I was confused because of the amount of times these things have happened in my life. And God has pointed a direction for me, and I've taken that direction, but it has only led to more issues, more pain, more failure. I was also exhausted because I've been bleeding for 6 months after this had been fixed up. And I said, God, what do you want from me? What do you want from me? Tell me straight. Don't give me a riddle. Don't get all John in Isle of Patmos with me. I don't want images. I don't want to see beasts with horns and many heads. Tell me what you want. Tell me straight. I'm not that smart, apparently. So tell me, what is it that you want? And I stopped talking. Because one thing that I had learned in previous endeavors, and that is that God is very humble and he speaks to you when you're quiet. And I just stayed quiet. And he said, Steve, I just want you to share your story, mate. I want you to share your story with my people and I want you to encourage them to share theirs. Share what I have done for them. I wish that I was humble enough to go, yes, Lord. But I'm a stubborn little fella. And what came into my mind was, do you mean I've got to go back to church? Because you know how I feel about church, Lord. You do. Happy with you, okay? But my history with Christians, I don't necessarily like hanging out with Christians, God. You know that. I'm not telling you something you don't know. I've had issues with Christians. Christians have let me down, and Lord, as you know, there's nothing worse than being judged by a Christian. And he said, I know, but I still want you to share your story with my people, just as you are. Don't change. That'll happen. But I want you as you are. But Lord, I'm not really qualified. I didn't go to Bible college. I'm not a pastor. I'm not like Will. I'm not the type of guy who's got this big voice, and I don't do that. That's just not me. I just want you. How you are. You are what I want. I don't want you to be someone else. I just want you to be you. And then, but God, I can't afford this. I mean, it's been really struggling with me over the last 6 months. Stephen, I just want you to share your story and encourage others to share their story of what I've done for them. Okay, I can do that. I'm not asking you to do anything that you can't do at the beginning. Just start this. Okay. Incredibly enough, within a very short period of time, not only did the bleeding stop, but the pain stopped. Got myself healthy. Got myself back into work. Got myself back into my life. Started contacting a couple of ministers that I know, a couple of pastors that I know, of small churches, who are very happy to accommodate me, either through a men's breakfast or a youth encounter or a special family day or a nighttime service or even a morning service. Started to go along well. Started to feel blessed, because when I spoke, people wanted to come and tell me what they'd been through. They just wanted to. I'm thinking, well, it's got to be more than this. And then in February 2020, I spoke at the National Conference of the Salvation Army Officers. Wonderful people, wonderful occasion. But in case, well, I'm sure you remember what happened in 2020, February. After that big day and after all these opportunities just opened up, and all of a sudden I'm thinking, how am I going to deal with this? This is like nationwide. This is huge. This is massive. You're being locked down. You're not doing anything. You're certainly not going to church. You can go to the pub or you can go to the bottle-o, but you're not going to church. Towards the end of last year, God started to nag me again. Stephen, all that's over now. I still want you to do that for me. Just you, nothing special. Just share your story and encourage others to do the same. Okay, Lord, well, I'll tell you what. This isn't a deal, because you don't make deals with God. I just said, okay, Lord, I'll tell you what, because I can't handle things at the moment. How about I just give it all to you? You bring people to me. You get pastors to contact me. You bring them to me, because I can't. I've got so many other things on, and I'm not feeling that good about myself. Introduced Pastor Will Smith, who just contacted me through LinkedIn and tried to link up with me. And here I am today. Make that for Will and for God, who's brought this connection. Because God has let me know many times, and I'm a bit slow, but he's let me know many times that he doesn't necessarily need my help to do his work. He doesn't need my permission, and he doesn't need me to be qualified. He needs me to be me and for me to do the simple thing that he's asked me to do. So I guess what I'm going to do next, I'm going to share my story with you. That was a long introduction, wasn't it? Have I got any time left? Okay. Next slide, please, Maestro. That's my lovely family. My father on the right-hand side, my mother in the middle, and my sister and their kids. My father has taught me, my father is absolutely 100% a resilient Christian. What that man has been through and how he has continued to hang on to God and absolutely trust that God will provide and that God will bring to us what we need every single time. My dad throughout my life has gotten up at 4 a.m. so that he can walk the block and hand out our daily bread scripture to people. Resilient. If there was a word resilient Christian in the Bible, in the dictionary, there would be a photo of my dad. There would be a photo of my mother who spent her entire life, my entire life, being sick, being in and out of hospital, in and out of surgery, in and out of near-death situations. Hasn't stopped, but her faith in the Lord has never, as far as I know, cracked. Next slide, please. My grandfather, you can see where I get my ears from. A war veteran, an extraordinary man, what he had to go through during the war, and then coming home to find the depression and having to fight for a living after fighting in the war, having to fight to put bread on the table of his wife and for his wife and kids. One of his kids was, of course, my mother. Because when Dad turned to Christian when he was 16, his father threw him out of the house. Dan Styler brought Dad into his house to teach him the ways of the Lord, to teach him how to be a Christian, how to move away from his many, many problems. These are the people that gave me the example that I wish I had have followed. Because you see, when I was a kid, next slide please. When I was a kid, I was raised on Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I was a very sick boy because you see, when I was in my mother's stomach, on my delivery day, I was very excited. And I spun round and round and round and round and wrapped the umbilical cord around my head and strangled myself inside my mother. So the poor lady, the doctors had to do unspeakable things to my mother to get me out. And I spent the first 3 weeks on earth in a little humidity crib, covered in blackness, not being able to be touched, which causes injury to newborns. They need to be touched. They need to be loved. They need to feel the warmth of their parents, of their mother. So that was my first 3 weeks. So I was taught growing up that God must have something special for you, Stephen. He would not have gone through all that if there wasn't something special for you. And that was my belief. And as I was growing up, I went through church 3 times every Sunday, morning service, evening service, and luncheon, which was everybody getting together and having a big lunch in the church hall. I played cricket for the church on the Saturday. I went to Boys Brigade on the Friday night. We had Bible study at our place 2 or 3 times, sometimes 1, sometimes 3, per week. My entire life was church and Jesus and the Bible, and I loved it, and I thought it was wonderful. Everything about the world is fantastic. All the people that I know, therefore all the people in the world, must be loving, forgiving, beautiful people. This was my life. This was my growing up. Then I went to high school. And because I was sick, because I had this puny little body with these skinny little legs and this massive head and these huge set of ears, and because I was polite and I was nice and I was kind, you know what that leads to, don't you? And I didn't know how to deal with it because I'd never experienced any sort of bullying apart from the Catholic boys on my street who picked on me a little bit when I was growing up, and that little bit became a lot because my dad used to drive the Banyo Baptist Church bus and park it outside our place so that he could pick up the kids of a morning. And these Catholic kids did not like a Protestant bus on their street. And me, I'm much easier to pick on than my dad. When I went to high school, being very small, the teasing was pretty immediate, but it was okay. I'm a lovely boy. Lovely. I can't tell you how lovely I was. And I was forgiving, and I was kind, and that's okay. But as everybody grew, as the years went through college, through high school, and I didn't. And the gentle teasing and the gentle pushing around and the name calling became worse. And it soon became very physical. And it wasn't just the boys in my year, it was the boys in the years above me that caused a lot of problems. And let me tell you, teenage boys can be very, very creative as to how they bully someone who does not fight back and is a Christian. Yesterday with the men's group, I went through this with them in detail, so you can ask any of the men with what I said yesterday. But there was one particular day when I was being bullied at school where I expected, the next slide please. I expected that my learning that I'm not good enough, which was established and enforced at school. I thought that on that really terrible day, even though it had been years of bullying and years of pushing around and years of hitting and years of, let's just call it inconvenience, when one day I was cornered and I was badly beaten, with the boys telling me this, and me having some expectation. The next slide, please. Because I had learned through my years of listening to sermons and my Bible study that if you cried out for God, He would send an archangel or someone to stop. And the preacher one morning was talking about smiting, and I fell in love with the word smite, that God's going to smite these boys. And please, Lord, smite them on the weekend so that when I go to school on Monday, they'll be gone. He didn't. But I thought, okay, there's a lesson in this. But the day that it was very, very bad, I was on the floor crying for God to come through, to send an archangel, to send a teacher, a student, anybody to come and stop this. But He never came, and the more I cried out for God, the more humorous it became for the boys that were around me. The only thing that did eventually happen is that the lunch bell rang. When the lunch bell rang, they finished off, had a bit of a laugh, went back to whatever their class was. With me, I was stuck in this place, and I had to take my clothes off because of what they had done. I washed the clothes. I washed my hair and my face. I picked up my school bag and I walked into the city because school was near the city. And I'm pretty sure that a part of me died on the way home, on the way to the city, because everything that I believed in wasn't true. To me, as a 15-year-old, it wasn't true. Therefore, God must not love me. Because I don't doubt God's existence, but if God is willing to do all these things and every one of His promises in the Bible because He loves me, if He doesn't do them, that must mean that He doesn't love me. Those bullies were right. I'm not good enough. I'm not even good enough for God, who is love. If someone who is love does not love me, man, there must be serious, serious issues. Thankfully, the boys at school pointed them out. And when I walked into the city and then walked in the Botanical Gardens into my usual little bench seat, that's when I decided, you know what, God, it's over. It's over with you. I have dealt with this and I prayed about this all through high school, and it hasn't stopped. In fact, it's got worse. And when I got home, the local guys were waiting for me, as usual, at the local train station so they could bully and push me around all the way home. So I'd get bullied at school, then bullied on the way home, and then walk up the stairs, and Mum would say, how was school? And I'd lie and say, great. My entire life was a lie because reality, I did not want to deal with it. When that moment came, I then got introduced to alcohol. I honestly believe that God gives everybody gifts, and I believe that my gift was alcohol. My gift was drinking because I could really drink. I was a little kid with a huge head, massive set of ears, and I could drink anybody under the table, and it was like a gift. And the more I did it, the more popular I became. The less bullying I suffered. When I started to scream back at the teachers, when I picked up smoking, all of those things, the more of those things I would do, the less I got bullied. It doesn't take much to figure out the further away from God I get, the better it gets for me. Once again, I was a lovely boy when I started high school. When I finished high school, I had alcohol problems. I'd been introduced to drugs that were also something that I could do quite well. And I had what you would call anger management issues. Got into college. Don't even want to think about college. Who I became and what I was just so insecure and so full of lies. And when you're full of lies, you attract people who are liars. And then everything gets worse because you've got to make up for the previous lies. All these things just go on and on and on and on until in 1988, I got offered a job at Expo. I was working at Expo. I worked well at Expo. The guy from Expo said, after Expo, would you like to come down to Sydney and work? And I thought, yes, out of Brisbane, away from all these people, away from all this lifestyle. I can go down to Brisbane, I can go down to Sydney and be whoever I want to. And I must admit, I played up. Because Sydney is not a good place to go to if you're young, single, like a drink, like your drugs, and have an anger management issue. So after a very short period of time, I left Sydney before certain people caught up with me, went to Melbourne. Didn't work so well in Melbourne for me, so I went to Tasmania, running out of land, going south. All the metaphors you want to think of was in Tasmania. Hitchhiked around Tasmania, thought, running out of money. Got to go back to Melbourne. Went to Melbourne. Thought I'll just be on the safe side of Melbourne, stay away from that side. And God said, I believe, that's enough. You've gone your little way. I've given you freedom of choice. You've done all these things. But Stephen, you're going downhill very quickly, and I don't want you to go downhill because I love you. I wasn't able to understand that, but I can see now that that's what happened. He introduced me to two Christian fellas, and I didn't like Christians. I certainly wasn't going to hang out with Christian fellas. But they were pretty good. They were pretty funny. And they accepted me for who I was, which is what I wasn't used to expecting from Christians. All my friends at Christian church were wonderful people, but I felt like they allowed me to hang out with them, but they weren't really my friends. That's obviously very untrue, but that's what I was thinking at that time. So here I was with these two guys, and they said, why don't you come down to Phillip Island with us one weekend? Go to Phillip Island. But Steve, we're not going to drink because we know you like to have a drink. Wow, we know you like to have a drink. We're not doing any drugs because we don't take drugs. We know you've always got something in your pocket that you like to have. We don't know what that is, but we have our suspicions. So no drink, no drugs, thinking, doesn't sound like much of a day. Oh, and by the way, we're not going to get into fights with people. We know that you like to fight with people. No drink, no drugs, no fighting. And do you want me to go, why? Because it'd be nice for you to take a day out, to spend a day with us. We'll go fishing, we'll do whatever. We just don't have to go down that road. And I thought, okay, fine. So we went to Phillip Island. We eventually got hungry, being 3 young blokes. The only place, unfortunately, that sold food was the nearest pub. So, of course, I drank as much as I possibly could in the short time that we were there, which was enough to keep me going until we got home. We got to a place just opposite Pyramid Rock, if you know Pyramid Rock. I'm about to put up a photo. Don't put it up just yet. But we were on this beach made of boulders. And the last thing that I can actually recall is that we found a faded Fanta can and we propped it up on rocks, and we would go about, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 metres away, get a big boulder to prove how big and strong we are, and then shot put it. And the game was to put it, to land out the rock on top of the Fanta can, to squash it like an accordion. Not knock it off, but actually land on it. I can remember starting that game. I don't remember any more. But apparently what I decided to do is that I decided to climb the cliff that was right next to me. Because one of the things I learned at high school, and even though I'd learned that years before, the habit was now entrenched. I'm not good enough. The only thing that people might like me with is if I do something dangerous and stupid and risk my own life and survive, and then they might go, wow, that was entertaining. At least if that happens. So I climbed the cliff. One of the guys climbed with me, after me, but he overtook me because he was small, fit, and sober. I was a big fella then. I grew 11 inches in grade 11, and I started working out, and I took it very seriously. So I was a big fella. And by the time I started climbing, Dave overtook me, and when he got to the top of what we thought was the top of the cliff, from the bottom looking up, we both thought that was the top of the cliff, but when he got there first, he noticed that after that, it goes back to this 70-degree incline, just of soft gravel, no footholds, no anything to grab a hold of. And in his mind was, gee, I hope Steve doesn't get here and want to go further, because there's no survival from that. But he also knew me well enough to know that I always went one step further. I had to prove myself to you. Thankfully, I've never had to prove myself to God. He just accepts me.
Yeah, wow.
Anyway, I kept going. I kept climbing at approximately the 30-foot mark, or just around 10 metres. I used to think it was 30 metres because that's what the police report said, but apparently not all police reports are correct. It's actually closer to 30 feet than 30 metres. But I got up there, and gravity's really difficult when you don't want it to take place. It sort of is. And I slipped down that gravel patch towards Dave, who did the smart thing, ducked his head, closed his eyes, and he felt me go over his head, and the next sound was me hitting the rocks at the bottom of that cliff. Rob, however, refused to climb. He told me beforehand that if I climb, I'm going to fall, and if I fall, he's not going to help me because you're an idiot. He saw me, in his account in my book, he saw me bounce down the cliff face like a rag doll. If you can put up the next slide, please. When I wrote my book, I asked Dave to go to the place and take a photo of it and to write captions because I have no memory of it, thankfully. So this is the beach, the rocks, as you can see. That's the cliff. We climbed that. That's the soft gravelly area. That's Dave's account anyway of what happened. But as you know, that sort of fall onto rocks doesn't end well. I always have problems saying these injuries. They mean nothing to me, but a lot of people might find them difficult. So I'll try and dumb them down a little bit and make them medical, because we can accept medical words better than we can accept the metaphors that I might make, or the analogies. I had a comminuted fracture, which is the shattering of the right occipital. from landing on my shoulder and head. As my brain began to swell, that shattering, the crack went over the ear, down through the cheekbone, through the nose, through the eye socket, and down through the jaw. So the right side of my face basically just collapsed. I used to be much better looking. My ears, however, have not changed. I wish they could have flapped their way down. Oh, yeah, anyway. I dislocated my spine from my hips, which the boys saw not only with all the damage to my head and face and the blood coming out of every facial orifice, but that my legs were at a very incorrect angle. The medical words for this, let me read them through to you, is fractured transverse processes at L1 to L5 with a retroperitoneal hematoma and displaced L5/S1 facet joints, which basically means that I broke my spine off. I dislocated my spine from my hips, and I broke off 5 of the transverse processes, which are the bones that hold the muscles next to the spine. Such was the force of ripping them off. My spinal cord, obviously, was still intact. In regarding the head injury, I had a major head injury, a comminuted right occipital fracture with a longitudinal complex fracture through the right petrous temple bone into the sphenoid sinus. Isn't that impressive? Which basically means what I said. I also had broken my sternum and the associated ribs, so when these two magnificent boys gave me CPR for 45 minutes through 5 heart attacks, they could feel my ribs being pushed into my lungs with every beat on my heart. But Dave's sister, who's a matron in a hospital, told him, when Dave asked her years beforehand, what happens if people come to the hospital and you know they're gone? And she said, it is better that you do something than you do nothing. Because you never know what God will do. And you have no right to deny a human being of life. It's God's child. And this was going through their head as they were working on me. And it just kept getting worse and worse. Because of that pressure, I tore my liver in half. My kidneys filled with blood. Trust me, if I went through everything, you would all leave. And I would be bored. The loss of skin, the loss of blood because of my problem with clotting. So when a guy called the ambulance, who just happened to be on the opposing cliff, because that's a bit of a horseshoe, and saw it on the walkie-talkie, that's right, the days before mobile phones, the good old days we refer to them as, saw this, called the ambulance, the helicopter came, landed on top, because it couldn't get in there. It was too narrow. But God blessed this pilot who realized that if he backed the helicopter in and was willing to risk just missing the blades with the rocks, they would be able to get to me. Took me to hospital, tried to find out who I was and who I belonged to. Eventually called my dad and my mum, who were at a wedding, that you better come down because Steve's had an accident. We can't believe that he's still alive, but he certainly won't be alive tomorrow. You better come down tonight. So my sister flew down on a separate flight to my dad. When she arrived, she went to the reception, said, my name is Kathy Oldham. I'm here to see my brother, whose name is Stephen Dale. And they said, yes, he's in that room. She went over to that room, saw a lot of problematic people. Came out and said, he's not in there. They said, yes, he is. She said, no, he's not. I would recognise my own brother. And they said, no, you would not. They took it back into the same room and pointed me out. When my dad came down, Dad got told the reality of the situation, and my dad was sick. A little while in a coma, very interesting coma, where lots of wonderful things happened that we don't have time to because I don't want to spend too much of the day on this. And then after almost a year and 4 different hospitals, multiple serious operations, the loss of 45 kilograms of body weight, a major brain injury that gave me what was called cognitive dysfunction, which means the inability to receive information. So my brain, being in the position that it was, didn't want to have to figure anything out. So any sort of incoming information, I would go into a panic mode. I'd have serious anxiety attacks with all these problems. These visions, these hallucinations would make me throw myself out of bed after my spinal operation. So they would have to come in every morning, roll me over, put in the mobile x-ray, take an x-ray, see if I've rebroken it. It went on and on and on, hospital after hospital, until I got put in a nice, lovely body cast from here to my knees. Can you put up the next slide, please? That's me on my first day home, me weighing 51 kilograms, being 6'1", standing up because I've got that body cast on. The next slide. And I'm standing up at my welcome home because I can't sit down. But there you go, that's me. From the big, tough, strong boy into that. Next slide, please. It was in 1989, so not everybody had a camera with them, and I did not want my camera or my picture taken. I do not want to remember this. But some brain scans a few years later, when they had a picture of my brain scan, they were concerned about that. What is that? Next slide, please. And realised that my skull had been very badly fractured and hadn't quite reached a point of getting back together. So I've still got a 15 by 11 millimetre piece of bone left out of my skull somewhere back here. And as you can also see, I know that it's dark and I know that it's not very clear, but that part of the brain is very dark and very scarred. And it appears that I've had a lot of issues, in which case, now getting back to God, according to the professionals who have seen 1 million brain scans, I should not be able to speak, read, write, create, recall, have conversations. All of these things should be beyond me. But God didn't just come in and say, bang, I'm going to fix you straight away, because he knew me, he knows me, he knows that I needed certain lessons. I needed to learn those lessons, and I need to learn them properly. So I spent 10 years, a decade of my life, from 21 to early 30s, teaching myself how to read, how to write, how to speak, how to do all the things that my brain had forgotten. And the one thing that I asked for continually is that I did not ask that God would fix me, because it couldn't just be fixed. It would be extraordinary. People would love it if I had had that accident and I walked out of hospital. But if that happened, I would have celebrated with a drink. What I prayed for was that God would give me strength, because this was painful. You can imagine. Everything I did, I got wrong. Just about all of my friends that I thought were my friends, they'd gone. Getting a job is very difficult. Long-term unemployment, long-term depression and loneliness. But when I was very alone, I felt the presence of God near me. It's impossible. Unless you've gone through it, you can't explain it. You just can't explain it. But when I came home and I got the body cast off, and I was scared of everything and everyone, and I would be at home because my parents, if I was staying with my parents, or my sister, if I was staying with my sister, would have to go to work, and so I'd be at home and I'd be like, I'm so alone, but I felt like God was in that room with me. It's impossible to say how it feels, but it's just like me talking to you. It's as realistic and as concrete as that. The only difference is that God didn't appear as a person sitting in front of me. I just felt like he was right there. And I spent all day long learning how to talk simply by talking to God and sharing with him what pains I'm going through. At the age of early 30s, with no job qualifications, with no job history, all I've done is I've been able to fight my way back, with God's help, to zero. Then I decided to start my own business because I couldn't get a job. I had more jobs that led to more injuries. You might think that I'm injury prone. I'm not. I just happen to find myself in the wrong place at the wrong time, constantly. All of these things led to me finding a wonderful woman, me getting married, a lot of these things, God just continued to bless me on. And I reached a point, and we get back to the very beginning of this talk, where I just thought, I can start to live my life now. Thanks, God, for all that you've done for me. Don't be confused. I'm not that bright. But it was at that moment in late November 2015, as you can imagine, God, I've been through so much more than I've had time to share with you today. What do you want? Stephen, I just want you to share your story and encourage other people to share their story about what I've done for them. We'll go from there. Next slide, please. Next one. See, right now you would think that I would have the greatest character. Reading that verse, wow, God, you must have the greatest character in the world, Steve. Depends who you speak to. But right now I feel like I'm finally on track. But I don't know what all this is happening. It's taken a long break, and now I'm here thanks to Will. Where's this going to lead? What's going to come next? What's going to happen? The Lord has done all of these things for me to teach me certain things that a lot of people wouldn't have experienced and a lot of things that people wouldn't have learned. Next slide, please. But he keeps reminding me of that verse. Stephen, you can do all things through me. I want you to do things through me. I will take care of what only I can take care of, but I will give you strength to do the things that I want you to do. God can do them all, but that's not the point. God does not want you. You are God's servant. I'll start again. You are God's servant. God is not yours. It is not your job to tell God what to do, when to do it, and how to do it because it's convenient for you. That is not what goes on. One of the many lessons that I shared that in more detail with the blokes yesterday, but one of the many lessons that I was taught was that God will not lift one of his almighty fingers to help you if he gives you all the resources, all the power, all the opportunity, surrounds you with all the people to do the work that he wants you to do. Just asking God to do it is because you just don't feel like it. The story of Noah. God didn't say, I'll build an ark, you just board when it starts raining. He said, I want you to build this, but you are going to cut down the trees. You are going to put them all together. You are going to stay faithful to me, and when they all mock you, you will keep focused on what I have told you. And then the rain came. What is God asking you to do or wanting you to do? Now, as I mentioned at the very beginning, I'm not a preacher. I haven't been to Bible college. I don't know the words or the phrases to use right now, but I believe that God is putting words and phrases in your mind right now. If he's not, then he's not, or you're not listening. I would like to ask you, if from this day forward you want to continue being the convenient Christian, if you could have raised your hand to that, or a resilient Christian who says, God, what do you want me to do? And you stay focused on doing that. And he opens doors for you. And he supplies things that you cannot supply, but he gives you the strength to do things that he wants you to do so that you can learn the lesson. One of the things that I did not learn from my bullying is that God was testing me. because I thought I was such a resilient Christian until things got really tough, and then I bailed. I simply don't want to bail anymore. And God's given me something to do that he knows I can do. And people that listen to it will think, I can take that one step further. Stephen, I can do this. I've got a story as well. And I don't share it with people because I'm humble. Are you humble, or you just don't want to share what the Lord's given to you because it might be embarrassing? Wow. It's not convenient. Will's brought me in here today to share my story, to introduce what we're going to do. If you would like to find out more about the Resilient Christian, because I don't want this to be a pitch for that. If you would like to find out more about that, come and ask me. Come and ask me when we're outside sharing food. If you don't want to speak to me, because I know that I'm a bit scary. You know this guy. His name's Will. He'll speak to you. Even if you're like me when I was on my knees beside the bed saying, I don't know what to do, but tell me. If the Lord is telling you, then share it straight away. Otherwise, you'll move away from it. Do something today with that. Speak to me, speak to Will. Will is probably more capable of not only assisting you today, but following through with you. Because you're here every week. I live on the other side of whatever. I'm a long way away. I can leave my phone number and I can give all my details to Will just in case you would like to speak to me. But it's just important that you speak to someone, that the word that the Lord has put into your mind right now, if he has, because you're listening, that you want to push it and you want to say, I want to say it. I want to tell somebody. I want to be accountable to somebody. I want to be moving in the right direction. Lord, thank you so much for bringing me here today. Thank you for introducing me to your son, Will, and for providing this opportunity where I could share what you've done for me in the best way that I can in this church this morning. From now on in, Lord, you know what's going on through everybody's minds. Follow through with them. Encourage them to follow through with somebody else. I know you can do that, and I pray that you will. Amen.